Force be with you.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the GNK DROID Fan Club podcast. Today we'll be talking and discussing about the Phantom Menace, which is the first installment in the chronological Star Wars series. I am here with Jackson, Heck.
Hello there.
And other members of the podcast are not present today for them not being able to plan out their day well enough. We have Seth, who will be on the podcast, and we have Drew and Lawson, who are all not here today, and I am Wesley. The Phantom Menace is a story of two Jedi who escape a hostile blockade to find allies and come across a young boy who may bring balance to the Force, but the long-dormant Sith resurface to claim their old glory and try to stop them from using this boy. So what did you like about the Phantom Menace, Jackson?
Pod racing. And that's about it. I'm not a big fan of this film.
It wasn't one of the best, I can say that.
No, it was one of
The
the
lightsaber,
worst.
the Duel of Fates, that was a good scene, though.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the few redeeming qualities of this film. And even then, I think I wasn't really a big fan of Darth Maul as a villain until the Clone Wars, because I think in this film, he's not particularly compelling or interesting for that matter.
He's not explained either, he's just there.
Yeah. I think you don't really need an explanation to build a certain villain. Like, if you look at Darth Vader from the first film, he was iconic he didn't have that much of screen time, but he was already iconic in the sense that he had this dominion, this imposing force over the rest of the Imperial officers on board the Death Star, and so he was already... And then you have the beginning scene of A New Hope as well, where, he's boarding the rebel ship and he's choking the rebel dudes and doing that stuff. So you already have this iconic villain built. With Darth Maul, you don't see a whole lot of things done with him other than he kills off, he comes to Tatooine, he has this small couple second fight scene with Qui-Gon Jinn, and then later on he has that long duel, which I do like that duel in the ending, but it all involves characters I don't really care about. Like Qui-Gon Jinn's death, it's not that effective in the sense that something like Obi-Wan Kenobi's death, where we could relate to him as this Jedi, a war veteran basically, who's been on this desert planet for years and hasn't really seen action in a while. So you have that interesting character arc for him.
Then what did you not like about the Phantom Menace? Besides Jar Jar Binks.
I don't know. See, I think Jar Jar Binks, it's interesting how a lot of people despise him, because I think he's certainly probably the least big problem that, in my opinion, the film has in itself. I think the film has, what I like to say is, it has plot, but it doesn't really have a story. Like, there's no clear main character or there's no main character or main driving of the film. It's mostly just, all this stuff happens, and
it's just they face whatever challenges pops up.
Yeah, it's just political and boring, and it's...
But if you look at the Star Wars films overall, you can start to see like a overarching...
I think, since we were on the topic earlier of antagonist, the Separatist Alliance in themselves, I think this goes for all the prequel films in my opinion, they weren't really redeemed. They weren't really established as main villains until the Clone Wars cartoon, which I find it,
In the Phantom Menace, I feel like the Trade Federation is more of a villain than the Separatist Army, just because they're the ones blockading Naboo and they're the ones invading.
I find it funny how a lot of parts of this film and then the prequels in regards to our antagonists and our characters in general, I find it funny how it took a children's cartoon to actually redeem the flaws in these movies. I just kind of find that funny. But yeah, I completely forgot that it was the Trade Federation. They weren't at this time. They weren't technically the Separatist Alliance, were they? Because you had that conflict with the Trade Federation.
The Confederacy of Independent Separatists formed between the Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, I don't even remember what was the reasoning here. Why did the Trade Federation want to invade Naboo? Was that Palpatine's doing?
I don't actually remember. I watched the movie a couple of days ago, but I think it was to stop help going into the Naboo when they just conquered it. It might have also just been Palpatine said to do it.
That makes sense why the blockade was established. Like, in a sense, that setup in itself, I think, could have worked. I just think the story that went along with it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, this idea of it's somewhat similar to the, not really, but it's like, you have our antagonists, and they've basically surrounded this peaceful planet, and the main characters, they have this quest. They have to go down to the planet and warn them of this army. Ironically, by the time they arrive to Naboo, it's somewhat pointless to warn them of any incoming army because the army's already there.
Oh yeah, they traveled with the army.
Yeah, they traveled with the army, which obviously goes against what their original plan was, since they are indeed, after all, ambassadors. Not they are Jedi, yes, but they're ambassadors at heart.
Yeah, so Jedi's first duty is the peace.
Yeah, but obviously that ideal somewhat was shifted and twisted during the Clone Wars era, but that's another talk for another day. Oh,
yeah.
Some stuff like.
And then, what did you think of the Gungan village?
That, I think, I'm interested as to what I think with George Lucas when he was making these prequel films. I find it interesting how he looked a lot more into the alien side, like extraterrestrial.
Yeah, in the original, you don't see many aliens.
You see aliens, like obviously in the Mos Eisley scenes where they're going into the cantina. You see that's one of my
more extras, not protagonists.
Yeah, they're more extras. That's one of my favorite scenes, obviously, because it shows.
But then you get like
more out there
Kit
sides.
Fisto and Plo Koon.
Yeah, and then you get to like the Phantom Menace, and it's set on this world. But then one crucial aspect of the plot is they find this species, the Gungans, obviously, who are living alongside the human. What would you call them? Nabooans? How does it sound right?
Well, I think they're Thedians.
Thedians. That sounds better. But you have that, and I think Mr. Lucas also leaned more heavily into the. I just think you see a lot more alien sides of the galaxy in these films. They establish a lot more of that, which I find to be an interesting direction. And obviously he uses quite a bit of like CGI and special effects, some of which I think I wasn't alive in 1999 when Phantom Menace was released. At least I think that's when the year was, right? But some of the effects I think they don't look that good. Others, again, for 1999 probably were good, but again, I wouldn't really know. But yeah, that's, I think, rewatching that film, I noticed I found it very interesting how George Lucas made these films a lot more political in nature, in the sense that you have this half of the movie is set like there's.
Yeah, because half of the conflict was the Trade Federation didn't consult the Senate before the blockade.
Yeah, and then you have that whole scene in like the Senate, which I find it interesting how George Lucas attempted to establish, again, the more alien side, but also the more political side of this galaxy. Obviously, I think nowadays, with like the films that we've gotten, and then the TV shows we've gotten, stray farther away from that political side, which probably because of negative reception of those films during that era, and obviously Disney likely isn't going to go into that deep. I do know there are many like books Like there's this one book about Princess Leia when it's after Return of the Jedi, I believe, where she's a senator and she's like trying to face off against multiple corrupt government officials in the New Republic, which obviously is a very unstable government. Hence why the First Order are able to take over later on. But yeah, I find it interesting how he attempted to do that. I don't think it was very successful.
What do you think about Benicio del Toro originally being set to play Darth Maul?
I don't know who that is.
He played Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park.
The kind of loopy dude. Yeah, as I said before, I'm not sure if it was really if the actor would have had an effect on how that villain was. Again, as I said earlier, Darth Maul in that movie is not given a whole lot of character that makes him special other than this really cool fight scene he has, which, in my opinion, a fight scene doesn't make a character. And I'm not saying Darth Maul needed like a giant character arc whereby obviously he's not the main character, so the movie doesn't need to focus heavily on him, but at least make him iconic and unique and interesting in the same way that the very first movie, immediately Darth Vader is iconic as a character in one whole set of a scene. I find that.
Okay, well then let's talk about some of the characters in the movie. We've already touched on Darth Maul, but we haven't really touched on Jar Jar Binks. We've talked about how he kind of changed the film, but what do you think about him?
I think I don't mind him. Again, one part of these films that I find odd is that they mix that political thing that we talked about before. I know this doesn't have a whole lot to do with Jar Jar Binks, but Jar Jar Binks sort of provides that comic relief and this sort of silliness to the film, and I think that could be used.
That did attract younger audiences. That did
attract younger audiences, and as some people have claimed, Star Wars is intended for children. So I think, but then when you try to combine that with this sort of political atmosphere, it doesn't really connect that well, and it's kind of an odd mix.
What do you think about him? Like, everything seems to work out for him. His clumsy moves always turn out for good or relative good.
Again, as I said before, I think Jar Jar Binks isn't that important of a character in any of these Actually, I take that back. He did technically indirectly create one of the biggest conflicts in these films by essentially helping Palpatine gain his position in power, which obviously is a very major event in this franchise.
He also helped the Jedi get to Theed.
Yeah, and obviously those are two very crucial elements of the story of these films. So I think obviously he does have some importance in the plot. I don't particularly like him as a character. I do have respect for the actor because one thing I learned very recently is that he suffered much harassment for playing the character, and so I may not like that character, but I still respect.
And what do you think about the theory that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith?
See, I find it funny that exists.
As I said earlier, it seems like everything works out for him. So it could be that he just gets extremely lucky, or that a greater power is at play. And also, when he gets promoted to Bombad General, you can see that his right hand is making little movements, almost imperceptible, but it could be a mind trick.
I'm not sure what to think of that. I didn't know of this thing. I mean, I knew of the whole Darth Jar Jar idea, and I kind of found that to be humorous in the sense that it was a remark off of a normally hated character and kind of putting him up to this.
Well, also, he was created by George Lucas' son, so I don't know if he would be a Sith, because that might just... I don't think his son planned it to be like that.
Yeah. But as I said earlier, Jar Jar Binks is probably the smallest problem I have with this film in particular. I don't really care for him as a character, and yeah. Okay, so I think one aspect of this, as much as there's a lot in this film that I don't particularly like, or as a kid found very boring, or still find boring now.
Like there's those political scenes that it's kind of more for.
Yeah, but also in general, the film as a whole, it's like, not really. There are some things that I enjoy about the film. Obviously, it's entertaining. Obviously.
It also gives us a bit of backstory on Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
Like he was conceived by the Force.
Yeah.
That almost sounds like the Bible story of Jesus.
Yeah. That's
so. Do you think George Lucas was alluding to that, or do you think it kind of just happened that way?
I don't really think. I don't think he was alluding to that, just simply because there's not a lot of biblical ideas introduced in these films. Obviously, we had that previous films in this franchise are obviously inspired by levels of some examples of like mythology or previous adventure stories. Like Star Wars at its basis, the original films were a coming of age story heavily inspired by fantasy stories and films about obviously you have a boy who has a certain dream, and then a certain event occurs, and then he has a new destiny, a new path to fall down, and he follows through with that and goes on this epic adventure of sorts, which is what Star Wars is about.
What would you rate this movie if you had to give it 1 through 5 stars?
I'd rate it a 5 as okay. Because, okay, fine, a 4. A 3. A 3 out of 10 it is.
Production manager's just nodding in the corner. I would probably give it a 3.5, just because it's not the most exciting film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it opens with just political talk right off the bat, where the Clone Wars opens with boom.
Yeah.
It's there.
It's somewhat of a disappointment, I'd say, compared to the previous films we've had. Just in terms of quality of story, of character, of plots. I'm interested as to why George Lucas went in this direction. I also one interesting idea I heard of, like, what if these films were made in the 80s era? I wonder, and I don't really know.
Well, then
how
it could
that
be
would
reversed.
affect
We might be looking
it.
on the original trilogy as the prequel trilogy that is not good.
Yeah. I wonder what would have happened if George Lucas had made this at a different time, because when he made the original films, one thing I found very interesting, I actually watched the documentary it's on Disney Plus. I think it's called Empire of Dreams. But one interesting thing I found in the documentary was that when George Lucas was making the original films, he was very limited on resources, and the circumstances were almost always against him. Like, obviously, with Tatooine, filming the desert scenes, the desert he was in.
And when they filmed the Hoth scenes,
almost
they,
the exact problems.
The cast got to go inside for 5 minutes in between scenes because it was below freezing, and the extras that didn't get to go inside, they got sick. Then, okay, what Star Wars Phantom Menace character would you say you are?
Yes. I'd say Jar Jar Binks, because, and I don't mean as in I like this character, because I don't like this character, but I'd say in regards to personality. Not goofy.
He's just easygoing.
And he's easy to despise, much like me.
I feel like I'm more of an Obi-Wan type of person, because I can be patient, but most of the time, I just want to get stuff done. I want to get it the most efficient way, without having to do them, like...
So you chose the the cool, chill route, and I chose this character. This is a character who's most like me, and I despise him. Is that correlated?
Okay, then who would you say that Lawson is?
Oh, Lawson. Intriguing.
Kind of feel like he's possibly an Anakin, because he has like a young spirit. He's easygoing, and he'll just work to help others with what they need.
But he's not annoying. He's not an annoying little whiny baby. I think I do have some interesting things to say about the character of Anakin, but I think I'll hold those off till we get into when we get into the other prequel episodes.
Yeah, we also could do some character analysis episodes if
I'd like that.
Like just focus on this character throughout the whole series,
because I think when this film introduces Anakin Skywalker, it's
kind of like an afterthought. His introduction.
Yeah,
they just meet him shopping.
It's almost entirely different from. Yes, it's set on the same planet, but it's almost entirely different from how we meet Luke. And they have similar personalities, but as we know, their fate and their character arc in general is vastly different from each other. And yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about him as a character. I found when I was rewatching the film, there were various times where I was like, I don't know, he's kind of just an annoying boy and doesn't really have.
Why would he do that when he could have done this?
Yeah, but he's just kind of an annoying character.
He's supposed to be like the technology whiz.
Yeah.
And you'd think he'd know how to fly a basic Thedian plane, but he struggles with it until it's too late.
Yeah. I also find it odd how he's immediately able to fly one of their spaceships, and he's the one who somehow accidentally just blows up the droid command ship.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, how are we gonna stop this giant droid army that's capable of wiping us all out? Just send a little toddler up there with a spaceship, see what happens. I just kind of find that funny, but I also don't like that because that's not good storytelling.
Kind of like the plot rises, but then it just plummets, like with almost no. Again, at that same time, we have the Duel of Fates, and the Duel of Fates kind of does the same thing too. Like the Duel of Fates, like it climaxes, then it just plummets. Like Qui-Gon gets killed, and then the fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Maul lasts maybe 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah. Obviously, another thing I really like about this, and this is with every single film in this franchise, the musical score. Obviously,
John Williams. I've looked up to him since I was able to read his name.
Is a crucial part of I'd say he's a crucial part of the appeal to these films. The music, it's very important for building a scene. Obviously, Steven Spielberg said that he deserves a lot of credit for the success of his films, and I'm pretty sure George Lucas said the same in the documentary I watched. But John Williams' music really provides a sort of fantasy, adventure, epic feel to these films, and which is really helpful for backing it up. Because
it even gives you little hints on the future, like Anakin's theme, the last 10 seconds is the Imperial March.
Yeah, and then you have such iconic just music in general that quite a lot of people may probably know.
It's catchy.
I think in Phantom Menace, one of my favorite pieces is actually in this film, and probably in the prequels as well. But it's like this music that's played when the droid army are first attacking when they're first launching their invasion of Naboo. I think it's a lot more complex, obviously, in notes. But I think, yeah. I think one thing these films do well is their musical score. Obviously, were any of the sequel films were any of their scores by John Williams?
I believe they were all by John Williams, if not inspired by him.
Interesting. I don't know.
I know he still writes music today for movies, so I figured
probably
in 1999, that's when Phantom Menace came out. I figured he would be still writing music if he writes them in 2020.
Yeah. But yeah, John Williams plays a very critical part in these films and the feeling they give off. So yeah.
Thank you guys for listening to the first episode of the GNK DROID Fan Club podcast. We will be talking about, in the next episode, the attack of the clones and doing basically what we did today. So, thanks for listening. God bless America. God bless George Lucas. The Phantom Menace opens on a blockade above the planet of Naboo, where we see two ambassadors sent to confront the Trade Federation about the blockade.
What am I supposed to say?
Just talk.
Why are you just... I have nothing to say about this.
We're summarizing the movie.
Okay, but so why can't... If you want me to speak, then...
Okay, fine. Let's wrap that back.